my prayers must be physical things that contact physical God. And physical God then can sometimes, if physical God so desires, answer my physical prayers. So we have deduced that if God is real, God is physical. Hello and welcome back to another video of mine. I am going to be talking about a very important, very topical subject today. Well, not really topical. I'd say topical for the past 2,000 years, maybe. It's about God.
Yes? 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 Oh, come on! Yes! Damn!
So I wanted to try to approach this video as honestly as I could, just as I'm a young human being that is trying to understand how the world functions, and I don't want to be too cocky. I don't want to appear like I know more than I do, because I think this is actually pertinent to how you are supposed to approach the idea of there being a God or no God, because we are human beings. We are born with no knowledge, basically, apart from the knowledge that was inherited from what I believe is evolution. I know that not everybody is on the same page when it comes to that, but I'm going to assume that the people watching are people who do believe in the theory of evolution. The idea is that when you call something a theory, just because I've heard this argument spoken before, so I want to clarify, when you call something a theory, you're being humble and you're keeping the name theory, but really it just means that you still have quite a decent amount of evidence that support your theory. I do believe in the theory of evolution, and I do believe that you inherit a certain way of being from the past by means of this theory of evolution. That's what I believe, because I do trust science to an extent. That I don't think that there's any reason for people to lie in general about, like, I know that this is what conspiracy theorists might think, that there is a bunch of people that are lying to you about a certain topic, and they could be mistaken, but essentially there has to be some element of malice, usually, and deceit, trying to deceive you. And it's illogical to assume that most people are like that, because most people, if you assume that they're like you, just want to live their lives. And so why would they live a life trying to make up lies? Just because they wanted to. So, or maybe like for some kind of profit. But then think about this: if you're trying to profit off it, then we live in a world where everybody, on average, is a bad person and is constantly trying to profit off you. Now, is this your experience in real life? When you talk to people, when you have conversations with them, when you open up to them, when you try to connect to them, is this your experience? If it isn't your experience, believing in conspiracy becomes less likely, and there can be cases of conspiracy, but conspiracy on the scale of the entire scientific community lying to you about the theory of evolution sounds unlikely. So the only other possible solution is that they're wrong, and the only way for you to figure that out is to learn the science yourself and learn why they say what they say. And once you understand that, then you can say, no, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about this, and this is why the theory of evolution doesn't work. So unless you do the work, unless you approach the argument and the field in good faith, I don't think you can really say anything. But personally, I have come to trust the scientific institution to an extent, even though I have my own criticisms of the scientific institution. You might see this in a few of my past videos where I'm a little upset at some of the scientists who got things wrong, and who are setting up the new generation of scientists to be more dismissive of new directions of thought, of inquiry. And I don't believe this is a good thing. So you might see me get upset in the past, but really I do, on average, trust science and trust the scientists to approach anything that they are trying to prove in good faith. And I have decided to trust in the theory of evolution via the trust of the people who are doing it. This doesn't mean that I don't understand the concept of a fossil, that I don't understand the concept of what scientists are trying to explain via the theory of evolution, but I also do tie this in logically with a physical understanding of the world, that it makes sense that if you do not believe in a grand creator, and this is when we're talking about God, okay, so I know there was a little bit of a lengthy intro there, but I did have to mention it because I do know that this would be relevant, this conversation will be relevant to people who will believe in the theory of evolution and people who will be suspect of the theory of evolution, and I wanted to approach those people as well with a little bit of an argument why you should, or why I at least chose to believe in evolution as a theory. As far as I can tell, if you assume that there is no supreme force that can magically make things appear, you do have to subscribe to a physical theory of gradual construction. And so you look at the world around you and you assume that everything was created gradually on its own, and there are ways to verify that through a lot of little scientific processes, and a somewhat of a trust in the scientific institution and the people who are doing the science, and their behaviors and their psychology and the psychology of a human being. I'm trying to be as general as I can be, just to assume that I am still an honest young human being that knows nothing, trying to connect to my world around me. So I'm not just taking anything as a given. I am assuming. I think that scientists are telling the truth because the psychological makeup of the human does not allow for too much lying before it starts causing problems for the liar. And so it makes no sense for someone to lie for too long. And so when you see all these people engage in a certain activity, you would assume that they are doing so in as much of good faith as is possible. There are a lot of experiments that will show that the world is subdivided into what is called the standard model. These are currently believed to be the smallest particles in existence, and the way that they work is they communicate with one another via other particles, right? So some of these particles communicate to one another via other of the particles of the standard model. So to create the world around us, and it becomes more and more apparent that there does not seem to be a need for a supreme divine force in order to construct the world around us. And yet, we find ourselves in a world where a majority of people do somewhat believe in something larger, let's just call it that for now, that is in contact with us and guides us or helps us in our life. So the first thing that I have to say before I say anything else is I do believe in the physical, meaning that I trust that I am here, that I can touch myself, I trust my senses, I trust that if I touch something it is there, and so I can deduce from that that I am a physical being. If I am a physical being, then if there is another being called God that is in contact with me, that responds to my prayers, and my prayers are thoughts, so my prayers are my brain activity, or at least part of my brain activity can be prayers. And so a God would have to be able to physically see my prayers and physically receive my prayers. I'm trying to break down a bit and take seriously the idea of a God and wonder, how can I make it work with the experience that I have as a physical being? And so my prayers must be physical things that contact physical God. And physical God then can sometimes, if physical God so desires, answer my physical prayers. So we have deduced that if God is real, God is physical. A little side note, if ghosts are real, or if spirits are real, or if UFOs are real, whatever suspicious phenomena that is not currently taken too seriously by a lot of Cartesian scientific people, and this doesn't include all scientific people, but maybe the majority of them, all of these concepts, such as ghosts or spirits, are physical as well. Therefore, they must be physical. So everything that exists is physical. If something doesn't exist, it's not physical. I invite you to think about this for yourself and to wonder, how can something exist without it being physical? To wonder about the philosophy of how can a thing be real if it can't impact me? So if you see the ghost, that means that it is displayed somehow to the world and reaches your eyes. And so there is something that's coming from that ghost to your eyes to show that there is a ghost. It could also be a hallucination inside your mind, but that too is real because it is a thought pattern inside your mind. So everything is physical. Even things like when you say love is love, these are notions that are not necessarily physical, but they are physical because they're not real notions. The actual thing that exists is you and your partner, or you and your children, or you and your parents, and a loved one that are showing each other behaviors of love, like offering gifts, or maybe a kiss, or a kiss on the forehead, or kiss whatever, some kind of display of affection. Your displays add up to what we call love, but the actual concept of love is a sort of generalization of the series of behaviors that we call love. And so it's a poetic way of making things simpler, instead of saying, well, your behavior of kissing your child, and then your behavior of being nice to your mother, and your behavior, instead of listing all the things, it's so annoying, like why would we do that in conversation? We just say love. We just say your love for your mother, your love for your child. Makes things a lot easier. And so these things are actually physical things. If you looked at the brain, it would also be like all these chemicals moving around in the brain and all that stuff, right? I'm still assuming that I am a scientist and that I do believe that the brain exists and that there's stuff going on inside of the brain, and all the scientists are not saying nonsense. And so we know now for sure, because we've deduced it, that God must be physical. And this is when we can enter the topical part, the actual debate that's going on between the atheists and the religious people. None of them are actually addressing this ever. I've never actually seen an atheist or a believer of any kind of religion, address the fact that God has to be physical. Now, I might have just not seen the right debates, and maybe they're just not as popular or incendiary, and so they don't travel online as well as something a bit more emotionally poignant, such as some flagrant arguments and some the people saying really silly things, and so you're like, oh man, that's so silly, I'm going to comment on that, and then the algorithm picks it up and spreads that. So maybe that's what's happening. But I actually don't think that anyone is addressing this issue of physicality, and because if you did, then the natural behavior from both sides would be, well, we have to define a physical God and go find the physical God. You would have one side going, well, we want to prove physical God's existence, and despite the notions of faith that are involved, and there's a class of believer that believes you can't prove it, you must believe out of faith. Let's put that aside for now, and let's assume that people who believe in God would be welcome, would be delighted if we could prove God's existence. And on the other side, you'd have the scientists, and the scientists, they should relish the opportunity to be able to disprove physically the idea of a God. They would be like, wow, we're going to prove once and for all that this God idea is nonsense. We're going to show the world. And so both sides should be eager to go define physical God, search for physical God, and either find or not find physical God. In fact, scientists should want to know the truth, whatever it was. If there was a physical God, scientists would be like, well, I guess we were wrong. There was a physical God after all. What do you know? This is not what we see. What we see is two sides debating the merits of the texts, the holy texts. This is why God can't be real, because it happened a very long time ago and people wanted power, and so it's probably something to do with power, and well, this is why it is real, because I saw a miracle the other day. And it's like, sure, this is circumstantial evidence, and it is, by the way, one of the acts of God that we might see, the coincidences that we might see around us, is one of the reasons why I am tempted to take seriously the idea of a God, because there are coincidences that sometimes occur in my life that are odd, and that I have no choice as a rational human being to entertain as a possible pattern. Because the idea of a coincidence, by the way, is abandoning the thought itself. So you say, well, seems to be a pattern, but I'm going to pretend like there was no pattern and call it a coincidence. So all the rational people watching should be wary of calling things coincidences, because it is irrational categorization. It is not rational to call something a coincidence, just to dismiss it. You have to engage in the possibility that it is a true pattern of the universe. Any pattern could be any pattern, but it might not be a God, but it might be a pattern. So you, in good faith, need to engage in the search. And so what I would love to see from the skeptics community, the atheist community, and from the religious community is this desire to search for the claim or non-claim or whatever they want for this God, to disprove or to prove the existence of this God, so we can finally lay the debate to rest. Because at the end of the day, both sides have the cop-out of going, well, we can't know for sure, so I'll see you later. I don't think that's a very intellectually honest approach to solving a debate. I do believe we need to aim for results. And if you don't, there is a certain degree of bad faith in how you choose to see the world. You must accept that if God exists, they are physical. And so we should search for them. The way to do that, in my opinion, and this is why I've been partly interested in physics, is we have to solve all the problems that we currently know about in physics. And we have to see if there are any leftover mysteries after we've solved all these problems. And then as a exercise in curiosity, we can probe these patterns that we are unaware of and treat them like a sentient being. And just assume, maybe it's a God. Let's just treat them like a sentient being and see if we get a seeming sentient answer back. And so that's how you would actually prove or not that there was a God. Now, there'll always be a possibility that those patterns that we're unaware of are just some other physical phenomena. But if they are, at least we'll have checked and we'll have done things rigorously, and we'll have treated the idea of God as a real possibility to be disproven or proven, instead of what I think is hiding behind our own preconceptions and our own fears of change. What if God was real? What if you learned that there was a God? Which God is it? What do they want? How do you contact a God like that? How do you connect to a God like that? Like, do they expect something from us? Or the opposite? Maybe there is no force, and those coincidences are patterns, but they're not sentient patterns. And so we have to wonder. My name is Qu'ran the Cam.